All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is Christine Westerland, and welcome to the IACAA and DCEO collaboration webinar. It is our pleasure today to welcome John Edwards. John, as you know, is our interim CEO here and president, I should say, here at the association. And he brings a lot of expertise and wisdom in many areas. And in particular, he brings a lot of, I think, great knowledge on strategic plans. And so this is an opportunity, since John is here, we're tapping into his wisdom today and to listen in as to what some things that he has to share with us. As with all of our other webinars, this is being recorded. It will be shared with everybody at the conclusion of this webinar. If you'd like the slides, we can provide those as well. And everybody, is in listen-only mode. So if you do have a question, you're encouraged to use your dashboard, and we will take those questions as they come in. Before we get started, as is our custom that we're trying to embed in our practices, we want to say together the promise of community action. So we'll go ahead and get started. Community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. All right, John, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Christine, and good morning, everyone. And it's a pleasure for me to be here with you this morning to talk about strategic plans. I can remember years ago, the first strategic plan we ever wrote in our organization in Florida. And clearly this was before the onset of the organizational standards, but I had members of my board, and I believed in it too, that we should have a plan that was separate and apart from our programs that really set the strategic direction, going forward. So we concentrated on things like fundraising. We concentrated on things like the business aspect of our organization, looking at it org-wide from a business standpoint. And so years later, lo and behold, we have an organizational standard, really a category of the org standards that really mandate that we have a strategic plan. So I was intrigued by the notion of working with you about a strategic plan, and beyond really developing it, how do we really use the strategic plan going forward? So I put together this presentation specifically, for you. Obviously, I'll be using it elsewhere, but I felt it was important to really dig more deeply into, once the plan has been developed, how do we really use it? So I want to start with a quick quiz by asking you these rhetorical questions. So they're just thought-provoking for you to consider about your strategic plan. So when was the last time you looked at your strategic plan? And not just the nice binder on the shelf, but what's inside it? Think about that. How did it inform you of your weekly or monthly activities? How about that? If it's been recently, how did it inform you? If not, consider this. Is your strategic plan informing your work? And keep this in mind. The strategic plan is beyond the compliance of Category 6 of the CSBG organizational standards. So let's go forward. The next slide, of course, is how we look at implementation of our strategic plan. So using your strategic plan is synonymous with implementation. And clearly here, we start, obviously, in our work with conducting a community needs assessment where we're looking at both the needs and the resources in a given community. We're also determining what might be the levels of need in our community at the family, community, or agency level. And then that leads us into our strategic plan. And so once we have a strategic plan, according to an organizational standard, we should have a community action plan. And then those three documents together then really lead to implementation. So we begin with the end in mind. So realizing that the end is the use of your strategic plan and is beyond compliance, as the implementation phase is the culmination of the work done to develop the strategic plan. Now, what we want to concentrate on, now that we have this wonderful looking, effective strategic plan that doesn't collect dust, now we talk about how we actually use it. So in using our strategic plan, of course, we're looking again at implementation. So what we believe and what we certainly teach and profess is that the implementation phase is the process of putting a decision or a plan into effect. In other words, we're really executing the services and the strategies, and we call this the process. It's the doing of something. It's really the activities, the services, the action. And those are the outputs that are generated in order for us to achieve an effect, which means a change. It's really the product from the process, and it's really accomplishing something. So in other words, the process and the product two combine into the effect. In these two ways, programs, it could be a self-sufficiency program, education, employment, Head Start, weatherization, whatever other programs you have in your organization, and the business aspect of it. So we have our programmatic focus in our strategic plan, and yet we also have some business related effects that we want to accomplish as well. So it could be something like raising money, which has nothing to do with programs per se. The use of why you're raising money, of course, is important, but the raising of the money is really a business related approach, not necessarily a programmatic focus. So sometimes I refer to this as the dream gap. You know, we have what we call the organizational budget or agency-wide budget on the one hand, and then we have the programmatic budget on the other hand. But what if there's a dream that you don't have the money for? So you want to fill that dream gap, and that dream gap then is a part of the business because there's something that you want to do organizationally that you don't have the funds for. So you go out and raise the funds to fill that dream gap between the money that you have in your budget already and the gap that's between what you really want to have in your budget. It could be something like board development. It could be, you know, how you want to reenact or reorganize your structure. It could be enhanced efficiency or improving your overall organizational budget. So basically here, Peter Drucker really gives us some insight in terms of what our plan really is as we as we move forward. So in other words, the plan must be operationalized. So what Drucker tells us is that a well-written plan will help organizations get the right things done. And so getting the right things done really helps us to focus strategically on our plan, what the results are that we want to achieve, but importantly also is the effect of the services and strategies that we implement in order to produce the results that our plan really calls for us to do. Therefore, the effect of the plan should contribute to the accomplishment of one or more of the current three national goals. So when we look at what we really want to accomplish, a part of our programmatic focus should be focused on the achievement of one of the three national goals. As you know, one of them, National Goal 1, deals with family level, and then National Goals 2 and 3 are at the community level. But what I really want to convey here is that a well-written plan leads to sound agency management and accountability, provided, of course, that the plan is implemented well. And so if the plan is implemented well, we should be able to achieve a higher level of impact, higher level of change. We should see the product being generated by the process, that is the use of the services and strategies to achieve effect. So let's keep that in mind, that a well-written plan leads to agency management, soundly so, according to Drucker, and obviously organizational accountability, again, provided that the plan is implemented well. So everybody must be informed. Again, management and accountability and the procedures that we have are critically important to the overall success. Now, this brings me to the point about implementing the plan. So Drucker also says that the nonprofit organization must be information-based. That is, information must flow from the individuals doing the work to the board management, and it must flow back as well. So this two-way information piece here is certainly something I really want to raise up as a critical element to implementing your strategic plan. So we don't want to have it done in a vacuum. We don't want to have the strategies and the services not being known, or better yet, that the strategic plan sits on the shelf and looks very pretty, but then the effect is never realized. So this brings me to this point, that the agency's strategic plan guides the implementation of your strategies to achieve results. So again, we're really focusing on management of the services and strategies, and importantly so, we're focusing in on the results. So what are the results that we're striving to achieve that's really attached to not only our national goals, but the various family level services and the community level strategies that we want to deploy in order for us to be able to be successful in our strategic plan. And so identifying procedures and personnel for observation and reporting results is an integral component of the strategic planning process in terms of how we use it. So in order to hold people accountable, the personnel that is, then we need organizational procedures, and I'll come back to that point later on. But the people need, obviously, to know what they're being held accountable to and for, and really how we actually report the results is also something that we really want to focus on. So this part of management and accountability, I want to raise up. And those who are being held accountable will focus on what is being tracked. So we will then concentrate on what we measure, and how we measure it really determine what will be considered important, and thereby determines what agency personnel will actually do. So if we really focus on what's important in the strategic plan, inform people about what's expected, then we'll be able to really have some focus on what we're trying to accomplish. So a part of this includes the identification of results. How are we going to track the results? How are we going to document the results that we achieve from the identified services? And we have to ensure that the identified services and strategies are in fact implemented. All too often in my work as a consultant and looking at strategic plans in particular, I find that people don't know what they're being held accountable for in a strategic plan. In fact, they don't know that they have a strategic plan organizationally. yet in the strategic plan, they're being held accountable for it, but in reality, they're not. So this also brings me to the point that when we talk about our services and strategies, we want to really focus on, in the development of our strategic plan in terms of its use, the assumptions behind the service and the strategies that we have identified. So if we were to, for example, everybody I'm sure has been to a birthday party at some time or another in your life. At that birthday party, the one that you've attended, they serve food. And so you get another invitation to go to a birthday party. And the assumption you make is that, oh gosh, there was food at the last party. I'm hungry. So there must be food at this next party to which I've been invited. So why did you make that assumption? Well, you made that assumption because you had experience in going to a birthday party one time. They serve food, so it's natural that we assume that there will be food served at the next birthday party. And so that's exactly how we look at the assumptions behind the services. Something you've tried before, maybe you've done research, maybe a partner organization has used a service or a strategy that yielded results. So you can benefit from that interaction with them, that interchange with them, that relationship with them, to really recognize that what we really want to do, the process, will lead to the result, the product. So the assumptions are very, very important when we look at that. So let's keep that in mind as well. So work doesn't get done by a magnificent statement of policy. Yeah, you can have it written all you want, but it really takes the following: that work is only done when it is done. It's done by people who are properly informed, people who are assigned, and people who are equipped. So when we talk about informed, what I'm focusing in on here is, do people have the knowledge that they should have in order to affect the strategies, and therefore that will lead to the services, or the service lead to the outcomes, or the services that really will lead to the change that you are pursuing. So if they're informed, then we like to suggest they are very knowledgeable. They have really what it takes. They have the skills. They have the know-how in order to be able to achieve the results. They are assigned, meaning they know that it's their responsibility. They know that they're being held accountable. They know that it's a part of their job duty. And then finally, equipped. Do they have the tools necessary to carry out what they're being held accountable for? Do they have the materials? Do they have the supplies necessary for them to be successful? So again, part of the implementation of the strategies and services in the strategic plan really has to be focusing on the people who are assigned the work to make the result occur. They have to be informed, and clearly they must be equipped. So we want to be able to, in our strategic plan, to elevate this process to the board and the executive level in the planning aspect of it. And clearly we recognize that from Information Memorandum 49, the board has a responsibility to be involved in the plan. And in fact, it is their plan according to Information Memorandum 49. So the board should be involved in the planning process, and they also should be involved in the use of the strategic plan. So let's face it, a good strategic planning process is not done until the executive director and the board have put a structure in place to ensure the strategic plan is woven throughout the board of directors and the organization and referenced regularly. So this way, if we operationalize the strategic plan, what we face is that it's held important at the highest level of the organization. the board of directors, the executive director, they're both really focusing in on regular reference to the strategic plan, and they're really driving it throughout the organization, and the information flows from the board through the executive to the executive team and throughout the organization, as well as it flows back to the board level. So you can see that this is constant communication back and forth about whether or not strategies are working, whether or not services that have been implemented are really achieving the results. So if we keep the strategic plan at the highest level of the organization, it maintains its importance. And therefore, if it maintains its importance at that level, it will maintain its importance throughout the organization as well. So there are no boards. Clearly, there are boards. However, if the boards really are not engaged in the strategic plan process from the beginning all the way to the end of the strategic plan, regardless of the number of years of the strategic plan. Therefore, the board was involved in the strategic plan process. There may have been some type of SWOT analysis, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I particularly like this aspect of the strategic planning process because this really is the business aspect of the plan. You have really, in your community needs assessment, where you have needs identified for anti-poverty purposes, but that's not complete. What we also want is a business aspect of it. And so the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis will help us to do that. So what I like to do and what I recommend to many organizations, all of them, in fact, that if you do some type of analysis like this, then you not only want to just list, what the internal strengths are, what the internal weaknesses are, what the external opportunities are in the marketplace, and what the threats are in the marketplace. You want to develop a strategy behind those. So we take another step at it, and then we take a look at the internal strengths and the external opportunities in the marketplace, and then we develop a strategy to use the internal strengths to pursue external opportunities. And then we do the same thing with the weaknesses. So we look at the internal weaknesses, and then we say, okay, so how can the external opportunities in the marketplace help with our internal weaknesses? And then the threats, how can we protect our internal weaknesses from the external threats in the atmosphere or in the marketplace? And so we're able to really compensate for and use our strengths to really help us to ward off external threats, external opportunities. We want to seize on those by really connecting strategically our strengths to the opportunities and threats, and our weaknesses likewise. So what we recognize is that boards get excited on the front end, the middle, and the end, and throughout the entire process because they're not bored, B-O-R-E-D. So the structure of the board work around making the plan successful is important. Board development goals can be aligned with the strategic plan. We can assign oversight of the goals to standing committees of the board. And then we really can appropriate financial or fundraising goals that are aligned in the strategic plan as well. So these are, some suggestions as to how to give life to your strategic plan throughout the life cycle of your strategic plan. So here, again, I want to concentrate a little bit on implementing the process questions. So these are questions, for you to ask internally and quite honestly answer internally. So who are the people to carry out the strategic plan. In other words, the positions. Are the positions or the people who are incumbent in the positions, are they equipped? Do they know about it? Do they have the knowledge? Can they really carry it out? Do they have the material? Do they have the supplies? And such. Critically important here. What must be done to align operations with the new direction? Clearly, we're developing a strategic plan for a new direction. The strategic plan is not to be done to consistently do what you've always done. In other words, you would need a strategic plan for that. So the strategic plan should help us to chart a new direction organizationally. It could be different programs. It could be how we really structured and organized. It could be how we're really carrying out the current programs that we're operating. So what must be done to align operations with the new direction is a critical question to be asked and answered. And then finally, how is work going to be coordinated? And so we want to be able to look at our structure, who's doing what, how the alignment is done organizationally to help us to have the structure necessary in order for the agency to be successful with the implementation of its strategic plan. So strategy implementation is a huge component of the strategic planning process. So here we want to look at programs. So the purpose is to make the strategy action oriented. So we want to, have action that really follows, and the action can only be carried out by the people. And the action is the only thing that we can do. The services are the only thing that we can do. So we want to make it as action oriented as possible. Then we want to be able to compare our proposed programs and activities with current programs and activities. Do we want to tweak them in some way? Can we deliver them differently in some way? Does it require a new program? We also teach sometimes that we are really tied to the obsolete. So what do we need to strengthen and what do we need to abandon? If, for example, if you're doing a service that is food distribution, is that something that really your agency should be doing? Or is it something that you can abandon? Are there others in the community whose mission is more relevant to handing out food baskets than maybe the Community Action Agency? That's an example for something for you to consider. So when you can compare proposed programs and activities with current programs, the effect of that is, do we continue doing what we've always done? Or do we tweak what we're doing? Or do we strengthen something that's critical inside the organization, and then we abandon something that we're good at, but it's not necessarily something that we should continue doing? So your strategic plan will inform you of what is important, where you place your focus in terms of implementation, and how, in fact, you will carry this out in a systematic, successful way. The budget also is important, and often in strategic plans, the budget is not mentioned. And so we really ask that the budget part of the planning process be considered at a very high level. So planning a budget is a key check on an agency in terms of the feasibility of the selected strategies, because the strategies are not free. While in fact you may have a lot of money invested in personnel, which is important to carry out, but the other money that you will include in the budget has to be factored, in the services and strategies that clearly we want to carry out throughout the 3 to 5 years of the strategic plan. So here, again, I mentioned earlier that we will return to this notion of procedures rather. So the standard operating procedures are important here as well. So we want to be able to detail the various activities that must be carried out to complete the agency's program goals. So what we're thinking here is that as we focus on our activities that we want to carry out in our various programs, looking at the end result, the goals that we want to achieve, do we really have operating procedures that delineate the expectation for our staff to carry out? And all too often, when I'm looking at logic models, for example, and so we have this chart of a logic model, but really what is behind the logic model to make it successful? Well, what we know is that the procedures are really, in fact, behind the logic models to give them life, to give them excitement and such. So the strategic plan is lacking unto that. But the logic model is a tool. It's a planning document. We know that. We know it focuses in on program operations and accountability. And so on the latter part is really where we want to have those standard operating procedures, program guidelines, and as such, so that our personnel will know how they're being accountable. So the logic model is really likened unto a facade. So what's behind a facade? Nothing, it's just a front. So the standard operating procedures have to be part of the logic model development. And then finally on this slide, the structure follows strategy. Changes in the agency strategy lead to changes in the agency structure. So again, when we look at strategy, we can't keep the structure the same way. We can't keep the processes the same way, or we're just keeping the notion of a strategic plan merely as a compliance document, not really as an effective tool, an effective planning process that leads to organizational change, organizational enhancement, and organizational way of focusing on what's important throughout the entire organization. A critical point here for us to consider going forward. So kind of want to land here about re-engineering principles, regarding our strategy or strategic implementation. So in the strategic plan, as far as using it, we want to organize around the product, the outcomes, the results, not necessarily on the task. Realizing though that the task, services, and strategies really lead to the outcomes, we still want to make sure that our personnel are focused on the outcomes. The task will take care of themselves if we really make the proper assumptions about the services and strategies up front. We know if they are implemented and they're implemented well, it will lead to the organizational results that we're striving to achieve. Have those who use the output perform the process. So in other words, we want to have staff, again, who are equipped, who are assigned, who have all the tools necessary in order to use the outputs to perform really the process of implementing the services, implementing the strategies, ensuring that they actually work, and reporting that back up all the way through the board level in an organized way consistently. We want to be able to organize information processing work into real work that produces the information. So here, what we want is not for us to be doing busy work, but focusing in on the things that are real work, real important aspects of it. If a strategic plan elements are done well, it will lead to organizational change from the inside out. If it doesn't lead to organizational change inside out, then quite honestly, the strategic plan may not have been done in an effective way, or at least the strategies and the changes that you want to make are not realized because we don't keep them as very important at a high level. We want to put decision points where work is performed and build control into the process. So what we're saying here is that the decision points are very important. Who makes the decisions? It's important that decision points be driven down in the organizational structure so that the people who are assigned, equipped, and have the responsibilities really have the control of decision making based on their position in the organization so that they can have the opportunity to control the process and therefore control the results that the strategic plan is striving to achieve. We want to be able to next put decision points where the work is performed. I think I just covered that one. And then finally, capture information once at the source. So if people are trained, they're equipped, they know what their responsibilities are, it's a part of their job duty, they should be able to capture information at the source, document it, collect it, report it, and then that information is put back up and sent back up into the organized structure of the organization in a systematic way. And then we want to look at putting the strategic plan to good use. Here, a lot of work was put into the development of the strategic plan. Of course, we know that. And I'm sure you answered the rhetorical questions I asked at the outset of this webinar. But a lot of work was put into the development of it. And now you want to be successful in implementing it. And this is really the critical point. You want to be successful in your implementation of the services and strategies. Therefore, the strategic plan will further your organizational mission. So whatever your mission is, the strategic plan should enhance the spreading of your organizational mission work. If it's not, then perhaps the strategic plan either was not developed well or it was not implemented well. One way or the other, we should look at that. So the work and the structure will require work. It will require follow-up. It will require data collection. It really will require accountability. It will require reporting consistently. So these are requirements, we believe, that really enhance the effectiveness of strategic planning and the implementation and how agencies can really use their strategic planning process in an effective and efficient way. Again, using your strategic plan, these are some key points here that I selected, and I think that these would be effective for you to consider and to put into use in your strategic plan. Develop a communication plan for your strategic plan. Right, that is true. So how are you going to communicate the plan internally? If there isn't a plan in the strategic plan for communication, guess what? It won't be communicated, and it won't be communicated consistently. Many of you know the old axiom that we say, if we're not planning, then we're planning to fail. And so if there is no communication plan, then you're planning that your communications about the plan will fail. So a communication plan should be woven throughout your strategic planning process and really be a part of your strategic plan. And since we're talking about using your strategic plan, the second point here is include an implementation plan within your strategic plan. That's important. Why? Because if you don't know how you're going to implement it, and there are no elements contained in your strategic plan, how it will be implemented, who you're going to hold responsible and accountable, who will be carrying out the duties, who will be informed, who will have the material, when it will happen, how it will happen, then chances are the elements of your strategic plan operationally will leave a lot to be desired. The third point is organize a monitoring plan for your strategic plan. And I think that this is essential because you got to check as to whether or not what you say you will do is in fact is what being done. And unless you have some type of monitoring plan, follow-up plan, check-on plan in terms of what you said in the strategic plan will be done, when you say it will be done, unless you monitor it, you don't really know. So obviously you don't want to be surprised because you want to have the type of monitoring plan in your strategic plan that will allow you to know when something is moving consistently well and when things are not moving consistently well. Fourthly, you want to develop and include operating procedures for your strategic plan. I mentioned earlier about the example of the logic model. It's a tool, but it's also just a facade unless there are operating procedures behind the logic model itself. So we suggest have operating procedures for your strategic plan and for your organizational structure so that the elements of the strategic plan will be operationalized. We've talked about accountability, the next bullet. So we want to create an accountability system as well as the processes for such in and for your strategic plan. So if people are going to be held accountable, personnel are going to be held accountable, what we want them to do is to know how they will be held accountable, when they will be held accountable. So what if they know what we will be checking on, what we will be monitoring, they're more apt to pay attention to those elements. Next, we want to clearly organize a process and product elements within and for your strategic plan. So you want to have the services clearly delineated. You want to have the strategies clearly delineated for community level work, for example, and the identified changes that you are striving to affect over the short term, over the intermediate term, as well as over the long term. Next, identify evidence needed as proof of results have been achieved. So again, you want to clearly identify what you need to have proven. And a part of strategic plan really has to have those evidentiary type elements contained in it, because if you don't have the proof, then how do you know what is being achieved? And even if it's being reported as having been achieved, you got to know that that in fact did occur. So you need to have evidence. For example, if you're operating a self-sufficiency program, you may want to know, no, you will want to know how many people achieve a certain level of training or education. So what proof would you need that that outcome or that result has been achieved? And then finally, on this slide, again, equip, train, and inform staff and the board members involved. So contained therein in your strategic plan, again, we talked about this earlier, but it's worth reemphasizing here the importance of equipping, training, and informing staff and board members involved about the entire process from the beginning of the development of the strategic plan through the implementation aspect of the plan. And this is really the focus of how you will use your strategic plan over the short-term, intermediate, and long-term basis. So using your strategic plan. So with these systems that I just provided to you, if they're really put in place, you won't have to worry about your strategic plan collecting dust on the shelf. And this is a critical point because we're not doing the strategic plan for compliance purposes. We're doing it for effect. We're doing it to enhance. We're doing it because we want to encourage or put our organizations on a trajectory that's going higher and higher and higher in terms of overall organizational impact in the community that have been entrusted to our care. You will also be reviewing and assessing how well you're doing on the strategic plan elements with a quarterly staff goal review, and each monthly or quarterly board meeting, there needs to be some attention given to your strategic plan. So your strategic plan really should be the primary document to reference when setting your organizational budget. It should have priority for really looking at how you use your staff, how you spend your money. It should be part of the budget. And if doing this, the strategies in how you can use your strategic plan more effectively, how you can implement it, and how really you can stay on top of the elements of your strategic plan. If you were able to put these into practice, it will serve your organization well. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be before you today. And I'll turn it back over to Christine.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. I didn't see any questions come in, but I have a question.
Okay.
Is the strategic plan, is that the best time to review your mission statement?
Yes, I would say so. At the beginning aspect of your development of your strategic plan, one of the first things you want to look at is your mission statement. And then just like we talked about the assumptions behind our strategies and services, we want to be able to look at the assumptions behind our mission statements as well. So whatever your mission statement says, then what are you trying to communicate internally to your board, to your staff, and more importantly, what are you trying to communicate to your community, to everybody who reads your mission statement? And so when we develop our mission statement and review our mission statement, we want to be assured of the messaging that we're trying to convey within our within our mission statement development. So yes, that would be kind of the first phase of the strategic planning process. Yeah, thanks, Christine.
I have one more question.
Okay, great.
So the guidance in the organizational standards is that we do the strategic plan every 5 years. Mm-hmm. Is that a good time frame from your perspective?
No, I like the 3-year period.
Okay.
Because the environment changes so rapidly, 5 years is just too far out. I mean, I like the 3-year period. It really gives us a sound focus. 5 years is just way out there. You know, it's tough to maintain focus, you know, for 5 years. So somewhere around 3 years is really when we develop in our company's strategic plans, we ask for a 3-year period.
Okay, and it looks like we did have a question come in. Will this presentation be made available? Yes. Yes, we will make sure that everybody gets a copy of the recording, and if you need the slides, we can get those to you as well. I don't see any other questions coming in, so John, thank you so much for this. I learned so much listening in, and I'm very excited to kind of go deeper into what strategic planning implementation is all about. That to me, I think, is very valuable.
Thank you.
So I want to thank everybody for participating in this webinar today. We do have another one scheduled for you for November. We are going to really elevate this idea of storytelling, and one area that impacts in your work and our work as well is the families of distinction. So our presenter is going to be our own Haley Wilson, our membership services manager. I might be able to sneak in a slide or two into that presentation. So we will see you all next on November 15th at 10 a.m. and I'll get that invitation out to you probably within the next couple of days. Again, thank you so much, and I appreciate your attention today. Take care and have a productive rest of your day.